Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Total Soccer Show. I am your host, Taylor Rockwell. Joining me on the other end of the line, across the ocean, we've got Graham Ruthven. Graham writes for The Guardian, for Eurosport, for many other publications, but we've got him on the show today to talk specifically about the Scottish Premier League and its relationship to Major League Soccer. I believe he calls them frenemies. Also looking at some Americans who are playing in Scotland. Then we take a look at Zack Steffen and his move to Manchester City, what might happen there. We talk La Liga, because Graham also covers that league, so we get into what's been happening with Real Madrid, what the future may hold there, as well as what's been happening with Barcelona, and what the future may hold there, not surprisingly. I really enjoyed it. We hope to have Graham back on sometime in the near future to have a longer conversation about La Liga and all of the many, many teams there, not just the two at the top, which is still a surprising thing to say about Real Madrid's season, less so about Barcelona. So I will stop with the introductions and instead say... Joining me now, I've got Graham Ruthven, who writes for The Guardian. Graham, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me from all the way across the Atlantic in a semi-medicated condition. Is that a fair way to put it?
Yeah, I'm drugged up. Yesterday would have been a bit of a struggle, but yes, I'm feeling okay today, ready to talk some MLS and some Scottish soccer as well.
There we go. Well, I wanted to actually start there because your stuff about MLS, I know you wrote some other things about like jerseys of the past and things like that. So I'm wondering, where did that interest first come from in terms of writing about Major League Soccer?
I'm not entirely sure, to be perfectly honest. I mean, if I think back to when I was starting out, I started to gain an interest in MLS round about the time I graduated from university. And as a writer looking for kind of a niche in soccer over here in the UK and in Europe, it's a very crowded marketplace. So I suppose quite cynically, I maybe look for where is underserved, and MLS was a growth area. Obviously, at that time, Beckham was still over there, and it was still kind of in that second phase of MLS, that growth phase, and really there weren't really many people in the UK certainly writing about it. So I guess it was quite cynical to start with. However, the nature of the league in terms of starting from scratch and everything is new in MLS, and really. That appealed to me. I know that doesn't appeal to a lot of people, and people maybe miss the traditional side of the game that maybe doesn't exist in MLS at the moment, because it's obviously only a 27-year-old league or something like that.
Something like that.
But yeah, it's always appealed to me, and I suppose on a base level, I've visited America many times in my childhood, and I like America, and I like American culture, if such a thing exists. So all those things kind of combine together to create this interest that I've got in MLS.
And were there teams that you were initially drawn to, and then teams that maybe you've become more interested in as your kind of coverage and knowledge of the league has expanded? Or does it tend to be sort of looking at it from a more like, these are the big name teams that are doing big name things, and those are the ones I'm going to write about?
I don't really have a team in MLS. I never have had a team in MLS. There are certain teams that I've kind of taken an interest in. Like, for instance, I've always been fascinated with LAFC. Just I find that whole project really interesting, and going up against LA Galaxy, and how there's this thing about the LA Galaxy. I've never really harnessed the LA soccer community. I'm not saying that's true or not, but that's an opinion many people hold. So I've been fascinated with LFC recently. How can you not be fascinated with what Atlanta are doing at the moment? Going back, and no, I never really had a team. I mean, at another level, I was a Cosmos fan. I still am a Cosmos fan. I have a Cosmos. I don't know what you would call it. You know those little bands that you get if you go to a festival, like a music festival.
Yeah,
I went to a Cosmos game a few years ago, and I still have it on my wrist. It's tattered and in bits almost by now, but it's still on my wrist. It's my little badge of I am a Cosmos fan. But I mean, we all know the Cosmos kind of maybe didn't flourish in the way that we all hoped. But at MLS level, no, I don't really have a team as such.
I still have like a Cosmos jersey from when Cantona announced that they are back, and it was going to be a whole big thing. And not so much, but I still have the jersey. I'm glad you still have the wristband. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the work you've been doing. Starting off with an article you wrote for The Guardian, I think last week, talking about kind of the frenemies relationship between Major League Soccer and the Scottish Premier League. One specific part that I wanted to get to was you noted a mutually exploitative relationship that has been forming. Can you explain a little bit about what you meant by that and how you've seen that relationship sort of evolve?
Well, I'll start off with a jumping point from Scottish soccer, which maybe your listeners maybe don't know as much about. But basically, Scottish soccer for years has struggled in the transfer market as it's exploded, not just in the past 3 or 4 years where you've had Paul Pogba and Neymar. Really before that, when Premier League teams were signing players for 30, 40 million pounds, Scotland was priced out of the market. And as a result, Scotland, the big teams who have money to spend, because in Scotland not every team has money to spend. Even teams like Aberdeen don't tend to spend a lot of money. They'll spend £200,000 on a player, but that's about it. So Celtic and Rangers are really the only ones that spend any kind of money. And even then, they've only got £3-4 million to spend. Celtic signed a guy from PSG in the summer there, Odsonne Edouard, for £9 million, and that was their record signing. They've never bought a player for more than that. So basically, Scottish teams have to be a little bit more creative. Celtic, for a number of years, had a fantastic scouting system where they looked at Holland, they looked at Scandinavia, they picked up Victor Wanyama, they picked up Virgil van Dijk, they looked at kind of players that had been chewed up and spat out by the English game, they got Fraser Forster, and they made a real success of this. But slowly over time, those markets started to catch up as well, and now Celtic can't go to Holland and sign a Virgil van Dijk because they're priced out at that level as well. So MLS is one of the few markets left in world football where the value is still stands up. I know Almiron went to Newcastle for 20 million, which is obviously £20 million, I should say, which is out of Celtic's price range. But if you look at a number of the other moves, Zack Steffen to Manchester City, Tyler Adams, I know there's an issue there with the Red Bull organisation, whether that price was affected there. But as far as we know, he went to Leipzig for $3 million. That's the kind of price point that Celtic and Rangers and Scottish teams can operate at. So MLS, as I say, as the market has inflated, MLS is one of the last few places to get value. And from the flip side of that, Scotland is one of the last places to get value in the market as well. So if you look at Stuart Armstrong from Celtic, he went to Southampton in the summer. He went for only £7 million, and now he's a first-team Premier League player. If he'd played in Germany or in Holland or even Portugal or somewhere like that, he would have gone for more money. And so MLS teams who are in a similar situation for different reasons due to their centralised system and structure and so on, they can't spend the money that the big European teams can. So they're looking to Scotland on the flip side of that to pick up a bargain as well. And that's where you get, I know they run successful in going from, but NYCFC went for Gary Mackay-Steven, the Aberdeen winger, in January there, because they can get him for pretty much next to nothing. And he's a player who's played at Europa League level. He's a Scotland international, and you don't really get that in other markets. So the factors that have led to this are different. Scotland is coming from you would call it almost a legacy brand, Scotland, in that they're now a declining force, whereas MLS is still growing. So that the trajectory and the arcs are different. But right now in 2019, Scottish football and MLS is in a pretty similar situation, and that's where that strange little relationship has come from.
And with that in mind, I did have another one that, like, maybe this is me being American, maybe this is me being younger or just living under a rock. But what is top trumps? You wrote that in the article that, like, comparing leagues is never wise, but sometimes the urge to play top trumps can get the better of us all. Something like that.
Okay.
You have no idea what top trumps is.
Top Trumps is just a card game.
There we go.
I wasn't aware that it was a British thing, but maybe it is a British thing.
It might not be.
It's a card game where basically it isn't just sport, but you could get it for, you used to get it for everything. Pokemon used to get it for. In fact, Pokemon is actually in its essence is a Top Trump style game where you have like statistics for each kind of quality, and then the idea is you trade them and compare them to. So basically, I just used it as an analogy for comparing leagues. On you go, well, this league's got better strikers than this league, and this league's got better goalkeepers than this league, and we all know that comparing leagues is a little bit foolish, but we all have that kind of natural instinct to do it.
Yeah, so I won't ask you to do that. Instead, I'll ask you this. You mentioned that it's like Celtic and Rangers have been the ones that are more capable of spending money. Does that then extend to their recruitment of MLS players, or do you feel like Ian Hark's going to Dundee, Gambole Arayibi at Motherwell? Does that indicate that maybe smaller Scottish clubs can also kind of look to the US as a route to identify and bring in talent?
Yeah, I think it really comes down to whether players are on the open market. I mean, Celtic and Rangers, as you say, they can spend money. So if they can get a player out of a contract in MLS, and obviously the slightly better ones tend to be tied down to longer contracts. Whereas, for instance, a couple of years ago, Perry Kitchen ended up at Hearts. His contract was up at the end of the season with DC, so it was easier for Hearts to get him. That's where Scottish clubs operate. They operate on free agents. They operate on loans. I'm talking about Scottish clubs below Celtic and Rangers. That is. So if there's free agency involved, then that's when the lower clubs can poach an MLS talent. If not, it's really only Celtic and Rangers that have the financial clout to actually pay a fee.
And if there is a young American who's weighing up, say, like college, signing a homegrown deal with an MLS club, or maybe looking to move to Scotland, how do you think Scotland rates in terms of like a league that allows players to develop both technically and probably physically, but then move on to maybe other leagues out there? Like, do you think it is a good stopover point or a good place to land for players who want to kind of continue to move towards Europe in their careers?
Yeah, I think it is. I think that I know MLS has just had a bit of a watershed, few months with selling players to not just European clubs, but to big European clubs, and players be it like Luciano Acosta being linked with PSG. So this might change from this point on, but I still think Scotland is a better stepping stone for young players at this point than MLS. It's just a lot of it's down to just proximity of the market. I mean, England, the Premier League is just a few miles down the road in Scotland, so you get scouts coming up here a lot more often, and you've got examples. I mean, the golden example, of course, is that everyone uses is Virgil van Dijk, who came from Holland to Celtic. He got used to the physicality of the Scottish game, which put him in good stead for a move to the Premier League, and obviously he's now arguably the best centre back in European football at the moment. So, I think it's a difficult one. Obviously, it's down to individual circumstances. There are MLS teams that are better at bringing through young talent. I mean, if you're talking about maybe signing with, is it better to sign as a young player with a team like FC Dallas or maybe even Atlanta United, or is it better to sign with a Dundee or a St Johnstone? I would maybe say, stick with MLS teams. They've got a better track record, so it's down to individual cases. But if you're a top talent looking to make the move to the Premier League and you're not quite there yet, you're not an Almiron who can go from MLS to the Premier League directly, I think Scotland's a decent move.
And when you say Dundee, I think I talked about them with Ian Hartz. I have to ask, I'm assuming you've been to a game there. Are those two stadiums really as close as I've heard?
Yeah, they are. I mean, you could. I know there's the old saying about within a stone's throw, and obviously a lot of people use that not literally, but literally you could throw a stone from one end of one stadium to the other stadium. They're on the same street. They're probably 100 yards within each other, maybe slightly more. It's incredible. It really is.
So it's Dundee and Dundee United, right? Which is in and of itself kind of confusing to Americans, I think. But yeah, all right. So yeah, Ian Harkes can go to one, probably not the other. One thing we've talked about on this show on occasion has been how Portugal, but specifically the Netherlands, seem to have been places where young Mexican players can sort of go as their stepping stone if they want to move to larger leagues. That's one that kind of suits them. Do you think that the Scottish League could be that for American players because of the kind of language familiarity, similar-ish culture? Do you think that could be a good place for Americans to go if they want to then look at opportunities in the Premier League or in the Bundesliga?
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, as I say, that there tends to be there's a level, there's a tiering system. So as I said before, if you're, I know he's not American, obviously, but as an MLS player, if you're Miguel Almiron or Acosta, who's of a certain level and can make that jump directly, then don't go to Scotland. But if you are slightly lower than that, then yeah, the language aspect of it, the culture. I mean, Scottish football, it is a bit of a stereotype, but I think there is a bit of truth behind it. It is a more physical league than the English Premier League. So in that aspect, it can sometimes kick young players out of the game before they even get started. I mean, the example I used in the piece for The Guardian was Gideon Zelalem, who came up to Rangers when they were in the lower leagues and on loan from Arsenal, and to be perfectly honest, kind of not in an ability sense, but looked out of his depth. as a this sounds very profound and very critical, but as a man, if you know what I mean, he looked like a kid on these pitches in Scotland, and I think that can be quite difficult. But if you handle that, it stands you in good stead, because if you go to the Premier League and you've handled the physicality of the Scottish League, then nothing in England is going to trouble you. So it is a good stepping stone, I think.
Much, much more still to come from my conversation with Graham Ruthven. But first, I wanted to let you know that we've got a new sponsor on the Total Soccer Show. It's Policy Genius. Life insurance is one of those topics that everyone knows a little bit about, but do you understand it well enough to feel comfortable buying it? Whether you're an insurance expert or a newbie, Policy Genius created a website that makes it easy for you to compare quotes, get advice, and get covered. I personally do actually not have life insurance, so I was happy to use the service. I looked it up. You can obviously look at different types of insurance. There's pet insurance, there's health insurance, there's life insurance. I was looking for life insurance. You go and you put in some basic information about yourself, about your family. Then they give you policy coverage and policy length, and you can kind of adjust that to the amount you're wanting to pay a month, or the amount you want protection for in terms of years, or the overall coverage amount. All of that is variable, so it's really user-friendly, because this stuff tends to make me really stressed out when I'm looking for different types of insurance, or, contemplating shuffling off this mortal coil. It gets a little bit stressful. And when things are stressful, you certainly don't want a lot of extraneous detail and lots of paragraphs of information that you have to try to process. With Policy Genius, it's very simple. It's very easy. In minutes, you can compare quotes from top insurers to find the coverage you need at a price you can afford. We all appreciate that. So no matter how much or how little you know about life insurance, you can find the right policy in minutes at policygenius.com. Policy Genius, the easy way to compare and buy life insurance. Thank you to Policy Genius for sponsoring today's episode and for choosing to sponsor the Total Soccer Show at all. We very much appreciate it, and we very much appreciate Graham Ruthven taking the time while sick to talk to us about Americans in the Scottish Premier League, specifically Timothy Weah and Matt Polster. We also talk Zack Steffen, whether or not he's going to get any minutes at Man City. The answer is probably not. And then we look at La Liga, specifically Barcelona and Real Madrid, and the situations there. That is all coming up next. What is I know it's kind of like a blanket question to ask, but is there a perception of American players in Scotland? Like, is it still the kind of older one of like, oh, they work hard, but they're not very technical, or has that evolved over time?
I think a little bit of that still exists. I think, when it comes to goalkeepers, Americans have a very good reputation. You guys are, if an American goalkeeper, not quite to the same level, but you get the analogy I'm going to make here. It's like a Brazilian forward, that the two things kind of go together. And I think American defenders as well are very well regarded. We had Carlos Bocanegra over here for a little bit and impressed. I know he didn't stay at Rangers for long, but he impressed over here. So, I think things are changing, though. I mean, there's a young guy who you're probably going to ask me about, a young American, Timothy Weah, or Timo Weah, as some Celtic fans have now.
Can you explain that? We were wondering that. Why has he become Timo? Is that just what happens to Tim?
No, so a Celtic TV commentator who clearly didn't know any better on his debut called him Timo Weah by accident, and it's just stuck. Timothy Weah has made a real impression over here. So things are changing, and he could be in Scottish terms anyway. He could play a big role in kind of changing stereotypes about American soccer players, because he's been excellent.
Do you think, like right now with the way he's been, do you think they hope to extend that loan or sign him permanently, or do you think maybe he just ends up going back to PSG?
I think Celtic hope that he'll stay. I don't think he will. I think, as I mentioned, Odsonne Edouard previously, who signed for Celtic in the summer permanently. He was on a loan from PSG. He's a forward as well. He was on a 6-month loan from PSG last season, but that was a very different loan deal to Timothy Weah's. His loan deal was always with a view of either Celtic buying him or putting him in the shop window for someone else to buy him, and he did well at Celtic and he got the permanent move. Timothy Weah, I feel, my impression anyway, is he's either been farmed out to get game time to then bring him back to PSG. I'm not saying he's going to displace Kylian Mbappe or Neymar or Cavani, but I think there's a place for him in the future as a squad player at PSG. So I think they've farmed him out for that purpose. If that doesn't work out, I think PSG will probably sell him, and the price he's going to go for is probably going to be above Celtic's level. So I think the best Celtic can hope for is at the end of the season they go back to PSG and ask for another year's loan of him, and he stays for 18 months in total. But beyond that, I think he's probably not going to stay at Celtic.
And then going across town to Rangers and Matt Polster. I don't believe he's gotten any minutes yet. I'm wondering, like, what do you think he fits for Rangers? Why do you think they wanted to go after Matt Polster?
Versatility, I think, is a big reason they've gone for Polster. Obviously, he can play in the midfield. He can play. I think he's played at right back before. So Rangers were looking for a bit of squad depth in January. There was also the possibility that they might have lost their right back and captain James Tavernier, who's been a target for Premier League teams. Another example of Scottish football being used as a stepping stone. He could have went to Southampton in January. West Brom were also interested in the summer. So I think it was a bit of a contingency plan bringing in Matt Polster, who I know maybe that's not his best position, but he can play there. I don't think he will be a first team unless he shines and really exceeds expectations at Rangers. I don't think he will be a first team player. They've just signed Stephen Davis from Southampton. He was at Rangers before, and Ryan Jack is really kind of flourishing, and he's probably going to become a regular Scotland international quite soon. So there is quite stiff competition in the centre of the pitch, but I'm interested to see what Matt Polster can do. Obviously, he's had struggles with injury, and after a brilliant rookie season at the Fire, he's not really kicked on from that. So I'm rooting for him. I'm wanting him to do well, but it will be difficult for him at Rangers to force his way into that first team, I feel.
All right. Another one who's probably going to have a difficult time forcing his way into the first team would be Zack Steffen. You talked about him as well, but like more so, and I enjoy this with a lot of your articles, is that like you use the big move or the main move to talk about a larger issue. With Zack Steffen, it seems like the issue there was going to be how many players. They have like 28 out on loan right now, I think Man City do. So, like, how do you think he then fits in, like, let me put it this way. What do you think his future is at Man City? Because it doesn't sound like it's going to be on the field. So how do you think it plays out for him?
It's a shame with Zack Steffen because he's such a talented player, and he's probably the guy you're looking at to be the next US national team, men's national team number one. You're asking me what his role is at Manchester City. I think it's purely a business role. His purpose there is to make Manchester City money, which is a shame. And I know it's a very cynical look at modern football, but that's what these clubs do. I mean, it wasn't so long ago that Manchester City signed Jack Harrison, and then the most peculiar one of all was Mixed Diskerud going there. These guys are not going to get a game for Manchester City. I doubt. I mean, there may be a role for Zack as a third choice keeper maybe in the future, but in terms of getting real game time, he's not going to play for Manchester City, I think. So what will happen is he'll get loaned out to either one of City's satellite teams that they have, either Girona in Spain. I mean, it's not completely out of the question he might end up at NYCFC at some point, and then eventually the idea, I think, would be that he performs well enough to impress some scouts and Man City get a fee for him, which is really a model that they've had. Their academy is built around that whole business model. Phil Foden's the only guy that's really kind of broken through the academy into the youth ranks and the academy into the first team squad. I mean, even guys like Jadon Sancho at Borussia Dortmund have been put out to Dortmund for a fee, and he's one of the best young players in Europe. So if that's the sort of level, I do think I find it difficult to envisage how Steffen's going to break into that Man City fold.
Do you think the theoretical possible maybe FIFA regulations seeking to limit those numbers will play a part here? Like, first of all, do you think those pass? And if so, what do you think then happens to all those players? Is it just a massive fire sale, or does City try to hold on to 30 different players while keeping their core squad intact as well?
I think those regulations probably will be passed, actually. I don't think football is particularly happy with this situation as it is. The clubs at FIFA level only have so much influence, so if it was a UEFA issue, then it might be different. But FIFA obviously have more authority over the clubs to impose rules. I think if I had to speculate on how it would actually happen, the practicality of it, I think City, and obviously the other one that gets mentioned is Chelsea, will get some form of transition periods where they have 3 years to reduce their squad to a certain level, and if they don't do that, then maybe they impose some sort of fine or something, which is another issue, whether that would be enforced or not. But I think that's how that would be regulated. They would say, right, well, let's say by 2022 you have to have a squad of only 30 players, at senior players at your team, and then eventually they have to either let their contracts run down or sell them off. I think that's how that would happen.
All right. Well, I wanted to talk to you about more than just like Americans and business, because I know you've been writing a little bit about La Liga as well. That's one where our coverage has dipped. Daryl and I don't watch a lot of La Liga, so I'm excited to talk to you about it. I wanted to start with Madrid because they had the win over Atleti this weekend. Is what are your opinions on the current state of Real Madrid and what's happened there? Like, has Solari turned things around? Are things all rosy and happy and sunshiny, or is there still turmoil to come?
I don't know how much Solari has turned things around. I think a certain teenage Brazilian has had a big role in turning things around. And look, I've watched Real Madrid probably every game this season, and it can't be overstated the role and the influence that Vinicius is having on this Real Madrid team. It's quite incredible. I don't. This is going to sound so bold, but I can't recall a player at the top level of the European game having, at such a young age, having such an immediate impact on a big team like a Real Madrid or Barcelona than Lionel Messi. I know that sounds so bold. I'm not saying he's going to emulate Lionel Messi, that he's the next Lionel Messi, but as an 18-year-old, the Real Madrid as a team are pretty much now built around him. They give him the ball every time, and it was interesting at the weekend there when Gareth Bale started, and when Real Madrid have the ball, when their midfield have the ball, Modric and Kroos, they're not looking for Gareth Bale, they're looking for Vinicius. He's the first player that they look to. So Real Madrid are a strange team. They're a very strange team. I think they've got massive flaws. I think that there's a really difficult political situation going on there, where they have a lot of players on massive wages that they can't really move on, because who's going to pay for, the money to sign Marcelo, who's on €200,000 a week when he's in his 30s? It's a difficult situation that they've got, but as has been the case for the last few seasons with them, they just seem to be patching things together, and they're 6 points off Barcelona now. All of a sudden, people are questioning, well, could there be a title race in Spain? And the Champions League starts up again this week as well, and they have this habit of just finding form when the Champions League proper kicks into the knockout rounds. So, history may be repeating itself a little bit for Real Madrid.
So with Vinicius, I wanted to ask, what is he like? To the best of your ability, how would you explain what he's bringing to the table? Why are they building around him? What is it that makes him so special?
He takes on players. His decision making is excellent. So normally with an 18-year-old, a teenager, you would get some very raw moments. And I have to say, in the Clásico last week, he looked slightly raw. That's the first time I've thought he looked a little bit raw. There were a couple of poor decisions in that game. But, I mean, against Barcelona at Camp Nou, we can maybe forgive him that. In every other game, his decision-making has been excellent. He stretches the pitch for Real Madrid, which was a problem before. With Ronaldo gone, they didn't really have someone to take the ball up the pitch in a matter of seconds, and that's crucial to fundamentally that's crucial to a football team, because that opens up space, that pushes the opposition defence back, it opens up gaps. So that's really what he's done. It's no coincidence now that Karim Benzema is finding probably his best ever form in a Real Madrid shirt. He's scored, I think, 6 goals in his last 5 games, and a lot of that is down to Vinicius. The two of them have struck up a real understanding. So it's really in the forward line that he's opened up the whole pitch. You've got Luka Modric and Kroos now kind of controlling things, because the front line's not directly on top of them, which was the case before, and it just. A lot of it is down to individual ability, but a lot of it is down to the way he, as I say, opens up space on the pitch, and he's getting the best out of others as well.
So I was going to ask you who's been more important, Benzema or Vinicius. I feel like you've kind of answered that, but maybe the answer is a little bit both, but leaning towards Vinicius?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, at the moment, they're the two players that are in form, and Benzema's been excellent. I thought Benzema should have been sold at the end of last season. I thought he was pretty much done. But I've been proven wrong because he's in exceptional form, and yeah, Vinicius. I mean, Benzema's been in the team all season, and up until a month and a half ago, he wasn't really doing it, and then Vinicius has come in and really changed all that. So I would have to say Vinicius has been the jumping off point for this turnaround in form. But the two of them can do damage to any team at the moment.
And if you had to take your best guess, how do you think things play out this summer? Like, do you think is there a chance they stick with Solari, or do you think that we're definitely going to see a new manager?
That is a very difficult one to answer. If you'd asked me even 3 weeks ago, even when Real Madrid were in good form, I would have said Solari was still getting sacked at the end of the season. I think now Real Madrid are right in play for not just the league, but the Champions League and the Copa del Rey as well. I mean, if he wins a couple of those trophies, even for Real Madrid, I know they sacked Vicente Del Bosque all those years ago after winning the Champions League, but I think politically it'd be very difficult not to give him the job. So if you're, it's a very difficult one. I'll put my neck in the line. I'll say Solari will stay for next season, but I'm really not sure about that.
All right, neck on the line. I appreciate that. For Barcelona, they've drawn their last 3 games, including that Copa del Rey fixture we talked about. For me, that seemed like a surprise, but now, given what you've been saying about Real Madrid, maybe it makes a little bit more sense. But on the day, were you surprised that ended 1-1, given that it was at the Camp Nou?
No, to be perfectly honest,
right.
I think if you look at the track record of both Barcelona and Real Madrid, they've actually had better records away from home. So Real Madrid's record at Camp Nou recently has been excellent, and conversely, Barcelona's record at Santiago Bernabeu has been excellent as well. So I thought Real Madrid would actually take something from that game. I think their home games have actually been more of a struggle because the Real Madrid fans are notoriously tough to please. I mean, even when they're winning, you get whistles for certain players. Gareth Bale is a target at the moment. Benzema has been a target in recent seasons, although not at the moment. So I wasn't too surprised. Barcelona are in a similar situation to Real Madrid in that, you know, Vinicius has changed everything for Real Madrid, and they are kind of utterly dependent on him at the moment, even though he's an 18-year-old who's just come into the side. And Barcelona, maybe less surprisingly so, but are so dependent on Lionel Messi that when he comes out of that team, they've lost. I think they've only won 2 of their last 7 games in all competition, Barcelona. Mm-hmm. And I think 3 or 4 of those games, Messi's either missed out entirely or been on the bench. So they are completely dependent on. I mean, I know any team would be dependent on the best player in the world, but they don't really seem to have a plan B, and that's where they brought in Kevin Prince Boateng, which is the most insane plan B I've ever heard. But it is a plan B, I suppose. That's why they brought him in. They wanted to kind of ease the reliance on Messi and Suarez. I'm not sure if that'll work, but yeah, they are aware of the problem. I don't think they've got any solutions yet, though.
It's surprising to me because I would have bet all the money in the world that Madrid were going to be the ones to spend all the money in the world this summer. And now it feels like maybe it's going to be Barcelona again because they've got some holes to fill. I know they've already spent a little bit in January, but especially given the run they've got what, Valladolid this weekend, but then Lyon, Sevilla, Madrid is what I see as their upcoming fixtures. It feels like maybe that will be make or break in determining if Kevin Prince Boateng is a capable plan B or if they need to spend a little bit of money this summer.
Yeah, and Barcelona, worryingly, recently have looked very tired. I mean, against Athletic Club Bilbao at the weekend, where they drew 0-0, they looked so weary, which is a real problem for them, as you mentioned, given the fixtures they've got coming up. And this was something that Ernesto Valverde was criticised for last season when he stuck with the same team all the way through the year, and then it got to this, you know, people would say the business end of the season when the real big games come along, and Barcelona ran out of steam. And this season he was implored to rotate his squad a little bit more, and he's tried that, but it's not really worked, and then he's reverted back to the old favourites. And once again, heading into February, Barcelona look gassed.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, I think that dramatic note is a good one to end on. I do want to have you back on at some point to discuss more La Liga because obviously you're very good at doing that. But I don't want to take up too much of your time, especially because I want you to get back in bed. You got to rest up. I know you've got other stuff going on. But Graham, I really wanted to take a moment to say thank you very much for taking the time. If people want to read more from you or just see more of what you're up to, how can they do so?
They can find me on Twitter at Graham Ruthven, all one word, or they can find my author's page on The Guardian.
Beautiful. Well, Graham, thank you very much again for taking the time to talk to me.
Thank you.